Hi YouTube, it's Valerie Reified again, in your friendly neighborhood trans lesbian. Um, I wanted to talk about the, um, I guess it's being described by many as a debacle at Camp Trans this year. Um, Now, first of all, for those of you who don't know, you're going to need some background. And one, I wasn't there. Two, though, I do read histories and posts and articles, and I try to synthesize ideas, like everyone else on the planet. We don't necessarily have to be at a place to know an event happened. And I will not invoke Godwin's law on that one, but you know what I mean. Um, there's an event that happens in Michigan every year called the Michigan Women's Music Festival, and it is described as a festival for all women. And they have an interesting policy of restricting attendance to women-born women. What they mean by this are women who are female assigned at birth. And to start off, I need to talk about how this taxonomy is wrong. Trans women, medical evidence indicates, are born women. We have hypothalamuses that resemble the brains of cis women. Trans men have brains that resemble those of cis men. There are innate gender differences, yes, and they're not down there. Not for the most part. There's a very strong degree of correlation, a little better than 99%, or maybe a little less. We're not entirely certain there. But they're not universal. Um, and that my doctor was too damn lazy to look here instead of here, or didn't have the MRI equipment. I mean, it was 1983, so thoroughly possible, does not make the fact that he slapped my butt and said it's a boy any more accurate. Um, my experience and medical evidence dictates otherwise. So moving on, I believe it was 1991, when Nancy Burkholder, a trans woman, was escorted forcibly off the land by security there. The land being referred to as the area in which the Michigan's Women's Music Festival occurs. A protest festival was started in response, and that's called Camp Trans. And that's what I'm talking about today. Camp Trans' original goal was to include trans women in Michfest. But the festival as it exists today, Camp Trans, can't. It's not politically capable of doing so. One reason being, trans women there are vastly outnumbered by the trans men, who I'm not entirely certain why they're there. Because if Michfest is for women, and trans men are men, and they reject the idea that there's something invalidating about birth assignment that makes it somehow more valid as a gender, then they would be men and they wouldn't be welcome on the land. Which, I mean, that taxonomy tends to make a little bit more sense to me. Especially because I'm not there. I'm not asking these questions, but I think, a lot of these trans men have to ask themselves, would you consent to being called not really a man anywhere except for at the gates of access to a 3,000 strong lesbian folk music festival? Why do you let your genders be invalidated when it gives you access to women's spaces and undermines the presence of trans women in those spaces? I mean, this happens too. You see plenty of dating sites where, trans men will define themselves as women because it gets them access to women who identify as lesbians, and allows more transphobic cis women to justify discriminating against trans women, because if trans men aren't really men, well, then trans women aren't really women. You see the inherent problem. And so there's no logical reason for Camp Trans to be populated by a majority of men. There isn't. Not if it's about Michigan. Not if it's in any way a response to Michigan Women's Music Festival. If it's a specifically trans space, again, the gender mix is kind of worrisome, but you can't really do anything there. I know there are a lot of trans women who aren't comfortable going to Camp Trans because of the fact that it's not sufficiently a sausage fest. Yes, I did just go there. Myself included. My girlfriend included. It's not women's space. And if you're protesting to get into a place that's supposed to be women's space, then, again, why men? It doesn't make sense. I respect the stated gender of trans men too much to let them be honorary women. It's the same thing with cis men. I mean, you're men. Having one's identity respected does not necessarily always mean good things happen to, or political privileges or social privileges occur as a result of. Being respected does not mean that you're welcome where you used to be welcome. If I'm to respect a man's identity, I'll ask him out of women's space. That would be the natural reaction. And I'm not talking angrily or violently, but it's just a space for women is, by definition, not a space for men. It's not a space for all those who aren't cis men. Something like that is really just puerile and invalidating to those who have masculine identities, to say that they're not really men, which they wouldn't. Again, you wouldn't have unless the Indigo Girls were playing, and that was the only way you could get in. I mean, I don't think that that there is a logical reason for Camp Trans to be as much of a dude fest as it is, if it's going to still do activism related to Michfest. If it doesn't want to, that's great. But I think that you're going to see a significant reduction of, people who are interested in women's space there. If it's a trans-centric space, that's fine, but then it doesn't make very much sense for it to be there that same week. So yeah, I'm hoping for some responses. I mean, by all means, feel free to reply via video, but yeah, men, why are you defining yourselves as women? I don't ever respond, I'm really a guy, because I'm not. I know what it was like to be treated as one. That does not mean I know what it was like to be one. There is a fundamental difference. And, okay, having duly stepped on some toes now, I will set you to it. Get talking, YouTube.